Hey guys, me Sam Stein, managing editor at the Bulwark. I'm here with Will Saletan. We are both taking our time off from the Commanders-Eagles playoffs game. I think I'd rather be with you here, Will, but I'm not totally sure. But this is the business we chose, and these are the commitments we make for our dear viewers. Accordingly, viewer, please subscribe if you're seeing this. Really appreciate it. We're here to talk about J.D. Vance and the issue of pardons for those who committed heinous acts of brutality against police on January 6th. So last time you and I talked, Will, we were going over the reaction to the pardons itself. And I think we both concluded that not only was it ridiculous and problematic, but among the things that was occurring from Trump, it was probably the most significant is the conclusion that we drew. In that video, we talked a bit about J.D. Vance because right before, something like 8 or 9 days before Trump had issued the pardons, Vance had gone on TV and he said this.
January 6th pardons, President Trump says there's a process. Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
All right, so there you have it. Vance is on TV. He says, look, obviously we don't want to pardon people who attacked the police. That would be ridiculous. He did say there's gray area, but he really was saying, like, don't pardon people who attack the police. And then today he went on CBS for a Sunday show appearance. And he completely changed his tune. Will, what was your take on what he had to say?
Well, so first of all, that clip from Fox News from 2 weeks ago, he sets it up. So that's J.D. Vance before the pardons. He says it's very simple, not complicated. All right. He says he does say there's a little bit of gray area, but he says it's obvious. Obviously, nobody who committed violence should be pardoned. So that was the setup beforehand. So let's play what he said today on Face the Nation.
Did you counsel the president against these blanket pardons for 1,500 people?
Well, Margaret, I noticed...
Including those who committed violence.
Margaret, I noticed that you cut off the thing that I said immediately after that. The full quote is that, of course, there are gray areas. And here's the nature of the gray area. Merrick Garland's Department of Justice denied constitutional protections in the prosecutions. There were double standards in how sentences were applied to the J6 protesters versus other groups.
Okay, so now Vance has totally changed his tune, right? He said there was a little bit of gray. He says, you didn't play the full quote. The full quote is, I said there's gray area. No. You guys just saw it. He said there's a little bit of gray area. It's obvious. It's very simple.
Now it's all gray area.
Exactly. Now, like, everything is gray area. But because Vance is a liar and because the whole Trump administration is based on propaganda, he's going to try to gaslight you and pretend that he said it was all gray area. No. He obviously just changed his tune on that. And then he resorts to the thing about double standards. Like, okay, our people committed violence, but so what's happening now is Republicans, who used to be the party of law and order, are now the party that's soft on crime when it comes to crime, the violent crime that you commit for Donald Trump, right? But now they're the party that says, oh, but these violent criminals they're the victims of discrimination by the system, right? They used to mock liberals for doing this, but this is what the Republican Party is now when the violence is committed by their own people.
I'm sort of struck by the the false equivalency for starters, but then secondarily, the irony, of course, is that on the Democratic side, on the progressive side of things, like the big criticism against Merrick Garland was that he was too judicious. He went too slow. He played it too by the books. He bent over backwards to be, above reproach. And yet here we are, and Vance is laying it all on Merrick Garland for selective prosecutions. And it's like, obviously it's ridiculous.
No, it's totally not selective. And okay, the double standard thing is just false. Let's just lay that out, okay? Joe Biden never pardoned, sorry, I should qualify that. One time in the entire Biden administration, he pardoned someone who committed a violent offense. It was a woman who killed her husband. It was a domestic violence situation. It happened 50 years ago. The lady's like 80 years old or whatever now. Okay. So that's the only part. The rest of them are commutation. So Biden had a policy like, you committed a violent crime, I may commute your sentence, but I'm not going to give you a pardon. You should pay the consequences for the crime. Trump has crossed that line, and J.D. Vance is lying when he says that a double standard is being applied, because pardons have not been done by Biden for violent offenses.
Yeah, and it's obviously I'm not trying to excuse J.D. Vance here. But I think, like, if you're the vice president of the United States and your boss, the president, does something diametrically at odds with what you have just said, right? Like,
right.
You don't really have a choice, right?
Wait.
Dude,
Sam, you always have a choice.
Again, this is not an excuse for JT. I do think the thing is, what's he supposed to do at this point? Trump put him in an untenable position. He can't be like, you know what? My boss got it wrong this time. That would be bad.
Okay, I'll argue the other side.
Argue the other side.
Mike Pence, he defied Donald Trump. At the moment when Trump wanted him most, Mike Pence said no. The Constitution does not allow the vice president to overturn the election, and he has come out publicly since then and said this is a hard and fast rule that no vice president should do. So yeah, but to concede your point, J.D. Vance got this job because, unlike Mike Pence, he follows that rule that no matter what Trump says, Vance will defend him.
But this gets to the larger point, which is that there's always this classic pattern with Trump, and it's happened for 10 years now, where Republicans they're like, well, we're gonna do this, we're gonna be reasonable people, we're gonna say reasonable things, we're gonna follow obvious logical ends, and then Trump says something wildly at odds with it, and then they have to contort themselves around Trump, right? Like,
totally.
It was Mike Johnson was also with J.D. Vance right before the pardons, where, basically almost everyone was, where they were like, no, we don't want to excuse the people who beat police. We want to, but we do want to make sure that people who were there, just got caught up in it and, maybe have served a little time, they can go. And then Mike Johnson, of course, says, well, I'm not going to look backwards. I want to look forwards. And then he launches a committee to look backwards. But
let me ask you a question about this. What do you think goes through the minds of these people? So here's like Mike Johnson or J.D. Vance saying 2 weeks ago, we're not going to pardon the violent offenders. Right. Are these guys thinking that Trump is actually what part of he's going to do this thing and you're going to have to follow through are they not getting? Do they think there's some moral limit to this guy, that he's some line he's not going to cross?
No, I don't know if that's the case. I think there's still to them, it's like certain things seem incredibly logical. Like, of course you won't pardon a person who beat a police, right? And they don't, in their minds, they can't imagine that someone would actually, be okay with it. It still doesn't compute. And so they leave themselves very little wiggle room, when in reality, if you're savvy at this point in Republican, you should just basically imagine the most absurd position possible taken by Trump and contort yourself to that prior to it being taken, because that gives you at least some wiggle room. But but that's the reality we live in, right? It's like this past week has been one after another. When we talked and the pardons had issued, that felt like a sort of a seminal moment, right? But since then, there's been 4 or 5 various other things that have happened that are also like, whoa, this is a shock to our constitutional system. I'm thinking like firing all the inspector generals. Small, I guess, but it's definitively illegal. And we're just sort of like, that's, the other day, Trump was like, let's remove, millions of Palestinians from Gaza and just level the entire place. And everyone's like, yeah, this is getting a little bit crazy.
Yeah, and okay, you and I sit here and say we can't believe these guys are slow to pick up on that Trump's going to do this or that. How can they be surprised? But then let's take the inspectors general for a second. Chuck Grassley, obviously surprised, Mr. Inspectors General fan in the Senate, right, in Congress. And he's like, I don't really know what's going on here. Though no explanation is given. I'm waiting to find out. So Trump just sandbags all these guys. They keep shilling for him, and at no point do they realize that.
And that's where the Vance thing matters. Again, I find it hard to imagine that a vice president would ever just sort of rebuke his own boss. You're in trouble after that. But Mike Johnson should, in theory, be able to say, you know what, I disagree. And we are going to actually. And Chuck Grassley should be like, you know what, I'm not going to vote for some nominees of yours until you give me an answer on the inspector generals. And for folks who think that that's crazy, that's exactly what Chuck Grassley did when Trump fired inspector generals in 2020. He said, I'm going to put a hold on some nominees until I get an explanation. This go around, he did not.
I just wanted to dig into Vance just a little bit more. Play another clip from this because I want to get just how dishonest Vance is.
What the president said consistently on the campaign
Case
is
by
that he
case
was going to
basis.
look at a case-by-case basis.
This is blanket.
And that's exactly what we did. We looked at 1,600 cases, and the thing that came out of it, Margaret, is that there was a massive denial of due process of liberty, and a lot of people were denied their constitutional rights. The president believes that. I believe that, and I think he made the right decision.
What kills me about this part of the interview is he's saying that we did do a case-by-case evaluation. So let's just back up for a second. Literally 2 weeks ago, he's on TV and says none of the violent offenders are going to get a pardon. 2 weeks later, the pardons come out. He's like, we did a case-by-case evaluation. Remember, 1,600 people. So he's obviously just lying when he says there was a case. Like, first of all, you and I looked at that at the actual pardons, right? The only people who didn't get a pardon were the seditious conspiracy people. There was no evaluation of what happened in the videos and who did violence. Everybody got a pardon.
Not only that, Trump himself said he didn't do case by case. He said it was too cumbersome. He's quoted saying it was too cumbersome, so we just decided to do it all. And there's contemporaneous reporting that Trump decided to do it all because he got upset at Joe Biden's pardons. And he's like, you know what? Screw it. Just going to rip the Band-Aid off here. So yes, Vance is clearly lying.
Let's play the extension of the interview.
Daniel Rodriguez used an electroshock weapon against a policeman who was dragged out of the defensive line by plunging it into the officer's neck. He was imprisoned, sentenced to 12 years, 7 months. He got a pardon. Ronald Maccabee hit a cop while wearing reinforced brass knuckle gloves, and he held one down on the ground as other rioters assailed the officer for over 20 seconds, causing a concussion. If you stand with law enforcement, how can you call these people unjustly imprisoned?
Margaret, you're separating, there's an important issue here. There's what the people actually did on January the 6th, and we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly.
Okay, so that line at the end, he said, we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly. I mean, Margaret Brennan just read to him the gross details.
Vivid description, yeah.
We're not even showing those on the screen. People have seen the videos. These guys like tasing, beating, pounding, holding down the cops, concussions, heart attacks. It's obviously vile. And his answer is, not everybody did everything perfectly. Can you imagine what the Republicans would do if any Democrat said that about, some violent criminal that they pardoned, which didn't happen?
The Black Lives Matter protests that gone awry. Well, not everyone's perfect, but
right.
racial justice was served.
And then let me just do one more clip from this because I want to see how he characterizes the cop.
The pardon power is not just for people who are angels or people who are perfect. And of course, we love our law enforcement and want people to be peaceful with everybody, but especially with our good cops.
Okay, so there in that clip, he says, again, he talks about people who are they're not angels, they're not perfect, so he's making excuses for the criminals. But what really kills me, Sam, is that point, that word at the end. He says, we want them to be peaceful, especially with our good cops. What exactly is a good cop, according to the Republicans? Is he saying that the cops who defend the Capitol against Trumpers are not the good cops? Like, I want to hear more from Vance, and I'm sorry that she didn't follow up on that because it felt to me like he's not only rationalizing.
I hadn't seen that qualifier are good cops, but I guess. Yeah. I mean, in theory, not in theory, there are bad cops, but they're not the bad cops that J.D. Vance is referring to. J.D. Vance, I think, is talking about cops who, were critical of Trump, I guess. I don't really actually know.
Weird. It's like,
it's a weird one.
Because when it's Derek Chauvin, when it's like it's a Black Lives Matter case, the Republicans are like, back the blue, stand with the blue.
Back the blue.
But suddenly, when it's a violent attack on the Capitol by a bunch of Trumpers and the cops get beat up, suddenly we're talking about who are the good cops.
And I think in the end, that's sort of what stands out, is that you would think that there are some institutions that maybe you don't want to put a political filter on, but clearly that's not the case. And if you have a party platform that's built around respect for law enforcement, always and fully, then you cannot simultaneously have this position.
Yeah.
And that is what they're trying to do. And frankly, it's, I think people see through it. I don't know if it's going to matter tremendously, but I do think people see through it. I think this whole explanation about pardons doesn't pass the smell test.
The thing that worries me, Sam, is if anything's going to cut politically against Trump, it feels like it should be this, going against law and order, and with people who want there to enforce the immigration laws, enforce laws against crime in the cities. Did they just not care about this? Because this is a flagrant betrayal of of backing the blue, of law and order, of the police.
Yeah, no. Well, we'll see. Thank you for watching this. So none of us had to. I appreciate that. Will's always good on the Sunday show stuff. We're going to come back in a little bit and we're going to talk about Lindsey Graham. As always, do subscribe to the feed and we'll see you in a bit.